Leader of the Opposition.
Well, the reality is the cost of everything is going up, and the Prime Minister seems to be in denial about it. But you know what else is going up under these Liberals? Violent crimes. That's because they are soft on crime. Their soft on crime approach means that places like Winnipeg, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal are becoming more dangerous, with violent crimes increasing under their watch. Criminals who terrorize vulnerable communities shouldn't get just a slap on the wrist and house arrest or bail. They should be behind bars. Why won't this Prime Minister start standing up for victims, do something to protect the innocent, and make sure that violent criminals are put in jail and stay in jail?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, what our communities need is a justice system that punishes criminals. What we don't need is a system that targets racialized people because of systemic discrimination. Our reforms turned the page on failed Conservative Party policies, which contributed to the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous people in our criminal justice system. At the same time, through our new legislation, we're increasing maximum penalties from 10 to 14 years for firearms-related offences, including smuggling and trafficking. We are there to support Canadians and to keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Mega.
Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, 3 RCMP officers killed in Moncton, 6 worshippers killed inside a Quebec City mosque, 2 grandparents and their grandson murdered in Calgary in 2017. Their killers were given jail sentences of 40 years or more, but the Supreme Court has now capped sentences for mass murderers at 25 years. The Prime Minister likes to say that he has Canadians' backs. Will he stand up for the families of these victims?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our thoughts are with the families and survivors of the hate-filled Islamophobic attacks at the Quebec City Mosque and the other killings across the country. At the Supreme Court, we argued in support of a sentencing judge's discretion to impose a longer period of parole ineligibility where appropriate. We know this court's decision was painful for many. We want to be clear. Nothing in the decision changes the fact that all people convicted of murder receive a mandatory life sentence. Just as we did in January 2017, we will stand with the families, survivors, and community, and everyone impacted by such violence.
Member for Fundy Royal.
Thoughts are not enough. This decision means that the person who killed 3 RCMP officers in Moncton will now be eligible for full parole at age 49. The Supreme Court ruling hands this issue back to Parliament for this Parliament, this government, to do something about it. Will this government, will this Prime Minister act to ensure that families won't have to go through the re-traumatization every 2 years of parole hearings to ensure that their loved one's killer remains behind bars?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, allow me to be clear once again. Nothing in the Supreme Court decision changes the fact that all people convicted of murder receive a mandatory life sentence. At the Supreme Court, we argued in support of a sentencing judge's discretion to impose a longer period of parole ineligibility where appropriate, but we will continue to stand with Canadians. We will continue to stand with victims and survivors of these terrible killings.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
The Supreme Court of Canada's ruling on consecutive parole sentences takes the side of serial killers and mass murderers instead of victims. What is cruel and unusual punishment is individuals losing their innocent loved ones to heinous crimes and then having to sit through years of detailed parole hearings, only adding to the trauma. Why isn't the Prime Minister taking the necessary steps to ensure victims are put first?
Honourable Prime Minister.
What we are also doing is taking the necessary steps to make sure there are fewer victims of mass killings by, for example, banning military-style assault weapons in this country, something Conservative politicians continue to stand against. They want to make those guns used at Polytechnique, those guns used in other mass killings, legal again, which we will continue to stand against. Not only that, we're now moving forward on an initiative that will make it illegal to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada.
The member for Calgary-Midnapoor.
That's disinformation, and the Prime Minister knows that they were already banned in the 70s. Those with consecutive sentences have only committed the most horrifying of crimes, and yet the Supreme Court wants these criminals to have the opportunity to be in society again. Canada's worst criminals should be locked behind bars and not free to walk the streets. So when will the Prime Minister start standing with victims and commit to ensuring that criminals serve sentences that reflect the severity of their crimes?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Question, Mr. Speaker, is when will the Conservative Party stop standing with the NRA and start standing with Canadians so there are fewer victims of violent crimes, fewer victims of mass murders? That's why we are moving forward. We moved forward with a ban on military-style assault weapons in this country. It is now illegal to buy, sell, or use a military-style assault weapon in this country. And on top of that, we're moving forward to make it illegal to buy, sell, or import handguns anywhere in this country. The Conservative Party stands against that. Canadians should ask them why.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Section 33(1) of the Criminal Code states that the defence of extreme intoxication is not available when an act includes an assault. But just recently, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that Section 33(1) of the Criminal Code violates Section 7 and 11 of the Charter of Rights. Mr. Speaker, what part of this protects victims?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
This government is unwavering in our commitment to ensure that our criminal justice system keeps communities safe, respects victims, holds offenders to account, all while upholding charter rights. We're carefully reviewing the decision to determine its effect on victims as well as the criminal law. We've taken action to strengthen sexual assault laws to ensure that victims are treated with the utmost respect and are protected. It's critical to fostering greater confidence of survivors of sexual assault and gender-based violence, as well as the broader Canadian public in our justice system.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, time is not on victims' sides right now, so hopefully you hurry up. Mr. Speaker, because of the Supreme Court ruling allowing the defence of extreme intoxication, women have shared their fears about coming forward to local agencies and advocates. We are hearing from young women who are concerned about this decision, who are asking, is this really possible? Mr. Speaker, it is. There needs to be action. There needs to be resolutions. Victims' voices have been lost. When would this Prime Minister do something about it and fix this?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we have been acting on strengthening our criminal system's response to sexual assault for years now. We passed legislation which requires judges to obtain the necessary training to understand the complex nature of sexual assault and the myths that all too often surround it.
Just going to have to interrupt the right honourable Prime Minister. Right honourable Prime Minister, right from the top, please.
Again, we have and will consistently act to support survivors of sexual assault and make sure that the justice system responds to them better. We passed legislation which requires judges to obtain the necessary training to understand the complex nature of sexual assault and the myths that too often surround them. Budget 2021 included $85.3 million over 5 years to ensure access to free legal advice and legal representation for survivors of sexual assault and intimate partner violence. We've also made over $12 million in funding available through the Victims Fund for projects designed to improve the criminal justice system's response to sexual assault against adults, and there's more to do.
Kildonan, St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, gun violence has gone up significantly over the past 7 years of Liberal government. That is fact. It is also fact that most guns used in violent crime are smuggled in from the United States. Gun smugglers and gun traffickers are responsible for the murder of innocent Canadians in our cities like Toronto, Montreal, Regina, Edmonton. But why then, why is the Liberal Prime Minister removing mandatory jail time for people who smuggle guns into Canada under Bill C5? Why is he letting them off the hook, Mr. Speaker?
Good question.
The right honourable Prime Minister.
We're actually increasing the penalties from 10 to 15 to 14 years for illegal smuggling of guns. But the concern that the Conservative Party seems to have around guns gives me hope that perhaps finally they will agree to support our ban on military-style assault weapons. Perhaps they will actually actually support putting a freeze on the importation, transfer, sale, or purchase of handguns in this country. It's great to hear the Conservatives concerned about gun violence. Now maybe they'll step up and strengthen gun control instead of weakening it.
The honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Speaker, the reality is the Prime Minister's Bill C5 will severely threaten the safety of families, children, mothers, and vulnerable communities because Bill C5 allows criminals to commit serious and deadly gun crimes to serve house arrest rather than go to jail, meaning these dangerous criminals will be kept in the communities they have terrorized, which will disproportionately impact Black and Indigenous communities. It is sick, Mr. Speaker. Why is the Prime Minister prioritizing dangerous criminals with guns over the safety of our communities?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Of course, we are doing no such thing. We are looking at the systemic discrimination and racism that exists in our justice system that unfairly, particularly under the previous Conservative government's tough on crime approach, unfairly penalizes Black and Indigenous Canadians. This is why we will continue to move forward in responsible ways to make sure that criminals are punished, that penalties are brought in, that our communities are kept safe, including by preventing more Canadians from becoming victims of gun violence by strengthening gun control. Why won't the Conservatives stand with us on that?
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, Ms. Annie Sampson, former Vice Chair of the City of Montreal's Executive Committee responsible for public safety, said, there is concern for the fate of criminals in prison, whereas at the same time there are hundreds of families that are mourning the loss of a loved one. Even if the provinces invest huge amounts of monies in fighting gun crime, these investments will be in vain if the Liberals follow a reckless strategy. By passing Bill C5, there will be an increase in violence in Canadian communities. Will the Prime Minister accept that responsibility? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. We're improving the justice system to ensure that there is less discrimination and a systemic racism against Indigenous communities and Black Canadians. We will continue to ensure that there are fewer victims of violence by ensuring better gun control. I cannot believe that the members from Quebec in the Conservative Party are still standing up for less gun restrictions and to stop our attempt to restrict handguns or assault-style weapons. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is trying to play both sides. He's talking about C21, C5, but what's clear is that a Quebecer, Ms. Annie Sampson, testified that a criminal who uses an illegal weapon, no matter their ethnic origin, remains a criminal. It's incomprehensible to let criminals use guns to kill without having to worry about facing the same consequences as other criminals. For his part, the Prime Minister, with the complicity of the Bloc and the NDP, prefers to play petty politics at the expense of the safety of Canadian communities. Does the Prime Minister realize the negative consequences of C5? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the legislative measures in C5 do not prevent police officers from laying charges or prosecutors from getting convictions. What it does is to ensure that criminals are harshly punished while decreasing the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous Canadians in the criminal justice system. And I can tell you, because I know Annie Sampson very well, the former mayor of my region in Montreal, is very concerned about the fate of young Indigenous and Black people who are unfairly within our criminal justice system.